This is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Dover 2 by Joyce Porter. This is copyright 1965 by Scribner's. And Scribner's is a really good house, a really good publisher. They they have a long history of publishing really good books. And so, as you can imagine from the title, this book is the second in the series starring Dover, Wilfrid Dover. And we'll get into Dover in a little bit. This book is really something different under the sun, and whether you will enjoy it or not depends on a lot of different criteria. So before we get into it, though, let me just give you a little bit of information about Joyce Porter. She was an English woman. She had about maybe 24 books to her credit in 3 different series. One being this Wilfrid Porter, Dover, I'm sorry. She wrote the most books about him, and then she had 2 other characters. One known as the Con. She was the Honorable Constance Morrison Burke. And she has the distinction, some critics believe, of being the first overtly lesbian detective in fiction. And I've read some of those books, and she's very much a lesbian. There's but that's a different series. And then her other series stars a guy named Eddie Burke, who is a reluctant spy. And the one theme that ties together all of Joyce Porter's books is the fact that their protagonists are so utterly incompetent and cranky to the point of sometimes being miserable and obstructive and just really not the heroes that we have come to expect from our mystery, thriller, suspense novels, right? I think the general, let's say, critical, if I had to summarize the critical assessment of Joyce Porter in one sentence, it would be that people say, you read the books for the laughs. She plays it for laughs. She plays it for humor. And I think that's a really good way to go into the book, knowing they are intended to be quite comedic. Although I'll get into a little bit later on her plotting abilities. I think that her reputation for being, so funny sort of covers up the fact that she really knew how to plot a book and plot a mystery. And she did some really interesting things with her conclusions, right? So she was not a lazy novelist. She knew she was writing in the mystery genre, and so she got her hands on all the tropes and played with them through the eyes of these incompetent characters. So the reading public was made aware very early on that Wilfrid Dover is completely incompetent and miserable. Just a bit of the book jacket says, as in Dover 1, the reader is provided with all the clues. Read on and pit your wits against Scotland Yard's worst detective. And they're not exaggerating there. Dover is so detested at Scotland Yard and everywhere else that they're constantly sending him out into the hinterland. They want to get him out of London because nobody can stand him. So whenever there's some nefarious doings in the nether parts of Great Britain, they send him just because they don't want to look at him or deal with him. So I want to show you again the cover because there's a representation of Mr. Dover there, and that's exactly what he looks like, right down to the Hitler mustache. And he's frequently described as or compared to a pig. Piggy little eyes, a piggy nose. He's flatulent and eats like a pig, for lack of a better word, and is cheap cheap and lazy. He's cheap in that they send his a second with him, for a team of detectives, and he's always making this poor young man McGregor, who's a good guy and who wants to kind of get ahead in the police force and wants to be a true detective and do the work of detectiving. But Dover just basically makes McGregor pay for everything, all the meals, all the drinks, all the snacks at roadside or whatever. Dover never goes to his pocket. It's always poor McGregor, and he's constantly berating McGregor because McGregor is kind of a Boy Scout, right? He wants to play by the rules. He wants to do things right, and Dover is just looking to close out the case and get back to London as soon as possible. And he really doesn't care whether he gets the right perpetrator or not. He just wants to close the case. So if that means arresting the wrong person and sending them to jail and making them, meet the hangman's noose, he's down with that because he really does not want to exert much effort. And it is all very funny. It really is. Joyce Porter was a terrific wit. She does not at all romanticize Dover, right? She is there on the page acknowledging all of his many, many bad habits. And he's sort of how do I put this? He's like a train wreck of a character in that he's so awful, but you can't kind of take your eyes off him because he's such the antithesis of what you expect. That alone holds your attention in the book. But not only that, the plot here, as I mentioned earlier in the video, it's really quite good. It starts out with, it's called the Sleeping Beauty case. And so what has happened is about 6 or 7 months before the book starts, a young woman in a northern English town is shot twice in the back of the head. And she survives, but she's in a coma. And then someone kind of sneaks into her hospital room and smothers her to death 7 months after she's been shot twice. So Dover gets called in to investigate this. And, he's really pissed off about it. He doesn't want to go to the north of England. Everything is just like, a woe is me. Leave me alone. I really don't want to have to work for a living, because he really doesn't. He is indeed the laziest, most shiftless detective at Scotland Yard. But there are those people in every organization, right? We all know that. All organizations have these shiftless people who somehow manage to survive and maybe even thrive in some cases that I've seen. So Dover's method is to go forth with both guns blazing and accuse people outright of being the murderer, whether he has evidence or not. It's like he develops his evidence base by accusing people in public or, viciously or, in all kinds of different ways. And it's through these accusations that he learns about their alibis and other bits and pieces of the the background information that you need to understand the plot. And poor McGregor is always there trying to, make suggestions for, well, shouldn't we look into this? Or, shouldn't we follow up on that lead? Or just the things that you would think any good cop would do. And of course, Dover is always screaming at him, telling him to shut up. And, he thinks that he's trying to take Dover's job. And I mean, maybe he is a little bit because he wants to get ahead in the force, but he wants to do it the right way. And Dover is just the the pinnacle of what you do not want your police officers or your detectives to be. But here's the funny thing, beyond all of the really just funny situations that Porter puts her characters into and the reactions that they get out of people, is that Dover actually is not a dummy. When he's not, taking a 6-hour nap in the afternoon and snoring, the curtains away, he can actually have insights. He can sort of see how aspects of the case are fitting together and follow up on them reluctantly because it requires work or effort. Like he doesn't want to walk anywhere, right? I mean, just think about the English. Maybe I'm stereotyping, but I think this is true just based on everything I've ever seen or heard about the culture, is that the English are walking people, right? They love, in London, they're walkers, and, in the countryside, they go on long walks and they go through the moors and the fields and the woods. And, England has all those great public access laws about being able to have a right of way through private property if you're like on a hike or something. And he just never wants to walk. He wants a car at his disposal at all time. Like he would take a car like for a 1-block walk, right? That he could walk in 3 minutes. He would want to take a car. So that's another sign of his incredible laziness. But he brings it all to a very satisfying conclusion here. I mean, it's the clues are there. The conclusion is well set up. The motivations make sense, and by the time you get done, you feel like you've just kind of had a rollicking good time. You've laughed your way through it. If you can go in with that idea of this is not to be taken too seriously, it's meant to be played for laughs. I should mention, in contrast to Dover, the other character that I mentioned earlier, the on-con, she is not only a bumbler and a Budinsky and, just rude and has no filter, but she's a dum-dum. She really doesn't know what she's doing. So in those books, the cases get solved despite her presence, right? Because her presence should be enough to throw, a monkey wrench into the works because she just doesn't have the faintest idea of what she's doing. Dover, in contrast, does. And I think that's probably what makes these books a little bit more, they have just maybe a little bit more beyond the comedic, because he is deep down competent as a detective. He just doesn't want to put the effort forth to do any work or exert himself in any way, shape, or form. So that is Dover. That is Wilfrid Dover, Dover 2, with his little Hitler mustache and his piggish ways and his hilarious situation that he gets himself into. There were quite a number of Dover books. I want to say maybe 9 or 10. So if you get a taste for Dover, if you acquire a taste, there'll be plenty for you to read. The one thing I will say is, because I like to maybe give the both sides of the critical coin, is that I think a lot of the critics that I've read say that Porter works better in smaller doses, that she was a master or mistress of the short story, many of which star Dover, because you can take Dover in smaller doses. But he and her other heroines, because of their limitations, they're kind of like a full-length novel is almost a little too much space to be given to them. It's like friends you have, right? Who you love hanging out with them once every 6 months, but you don't want to do it any more than that. That's kind of like Dover. You spend a few hours with him and then you're like, okay, I don't need to see you again for a while. But I go back to him because I kind of giggle my way through the books because I thought Porter was so astute as an observer. And, sometimes when I'm reading these books, I get very distinct ideas in my head about what the author was like. I'll never know. I'll never sit down with Joyce Porter. She died in 1990, so I'll never know what she was. But I picture her as sort of a quiet woman who, sat in the tea shop and out of the corner of her eyes just paid attention to what was going on and got right to the bottom of it, knew what was going on, observed people, like nailed their personalities and nailed their traits. Probably the kind of person who you'd look at and think, well, maybe she looks a little dull. But I bet that when you were a friend of hers and you hung out with her, her wit could slay you, right? So this is just the feeling I get about Joyce Porter. If anyone knew Joyce and would like to comment on what she was like in the comments, I would love to hear it. So yeah, Something New Under the Sun, Dover 2. This book is good, but I think to really, if you really want to dive into the waters of Dover, start with Dover 1, which really introduces him and has really a weirdly gruesome ending that is pretty memorable. And so that's what I've got for you tonight. I actually have a whole bunch of books stacked up that I have to make videos for. So, I'll fit that in at some time. But until then, until next time, happy reading and see you in the next video, whenever that might be. Thanks.